Okay, on the show today, Michael Taylor. So Michael Taylor, I've been following for a while. Years ago, I was doing yoga, and I always say yoga inverted comma on a retreat, and someone came up to me and said, "That's not yoga. You're just moving." And I went, "Okay," because I was doing sort of wriggly, free form, yoga that actually feels good and is good for you. And then someone else said, "You should look up Michael Taylor. He's got some YouTube videos, and he's like you, just done some martial arts. And I think you'd really like his stuff." So I did. And this was like 6 or 7 years ago. And I did really like it. And I thought that is some of the best moving I've ever seen from a supposed yogi. And I thought I need to talk to this guy. And it's taken about 6 or 7 years to get there. So, Michael, what's your excuse?
My excuse, well, we can blame the pandemic for everything, but it's the same here. Ran into you about the same time. Always heard that everything you're doing is exactly the same, which, I don't know about you, Mark, but often that's not a compliment. You go and you look up someone, you're like, oh man, that person thinks I'm like that. And
usually it's not true either. Yeah.
Usually you hope it's, but in this case, it's like, okay, give me more. And, we were saying off the record, which I'll go on the record, I am not a pro dad and I have a 4-year-old. So that's pretty much my excuse for everything these days.
And we're trying to make friends here, yet you've turned up in a Germany top. So the podcasters, can't hear this, but on YouTube they can.
I'm Scottish.
Well, it's okay. That's
a joke.
That's a little bit better. That's a little bit better.
I love my time in Germany, but I am Scottish.
Okay, so let's hear a bit about your life, because you've actually not just always done yoga. You did extreme sports and all sorts of things. Like, how did you get interested in the body and movement, Michael?
I was homeschooled, and before there's a lot of judgments of, oh well, that explains why this guy is. I recently watched on Rich Roll's video an interview of Billie Eilish's mom. You know who she is?
No.
Okay, she's a super singer who was homeschooled, writes her own music along with her brother, and so her mom tells this story of that journey and how you miss some things, but you also, people always talk about, and this was true for me too, like, well, you're not getting this subject and that learning and this, but what's missed in that conversation is also the things that you gain. And yes, I was probably not properly socialized, which explains a lot when I was growing up. But at the same time, I did, like you said, I had a lot of freedom to sort of ramble in direction, spend a lot of time with much older people in my family. And my grandfather was my hero. He taught me a lot of Eastern movement, martial healing, philosophy. I got to practice with him as I was growing up. So there were members of my family who just were interesting, that if I had been in school the whole time, I might not have been able to make those connections and become everything that's problematic today.
Okay, I did hear another interview with you, and it was the death of your grandfather that sparked off some of this stuff. I mean, do you mind me bringing this up if it's
not at all? Not at all.
Okay, it sounded like that was a kind of a powerful moment for you.
Yeah, everyone in my family, or not everyone, but many members of my family have gotten cancer. So my grandfather was the first that kind of struck me. I think, then some other relatives. My father had cancer 5 times before he just gave up. He was like, enough is enough, and my brother. So it hit a lot of times, but this first one was in sort of my earlier teen years, and it just nailed me because he was he's a military guy, big, strong, like the kind of hands that are just, big, thick, powerful, but powerfully calm guy who knew a lot of stuff that I thought was cool. And I losing him it kind of threw things up in the air because I wanted to copy him. I wanted to be him. But there were these mixed messages of be in the military, don't be in the military, follow this path, don't follow this path. So it kind of left me a mess after he died.
And as I understood it, is a sort of bit of a sense of betrayal of the medical system as well, kind of a kind of Western scientific way of looking at it.
Gotta bring that up.
So if you don't want to go there, I don't want to push it. It strikes me, it seemed a pivotal moment from what I've heard.
Yeah. So my mom always likes to joke that I teethed on a stethoscope. I don't know if that's true or not. I think I did see the teeth marks at one point. My mom was a nurse practitioner, so that's why there happened to be one around the house. But yeah, going through this with my grandfather and then with other, family members along the way, each time it was the weirdest thing that I first noticed with my grandfather is he was fine. Then he went in for treatment and he wasn't.
All right.
And I'm not saying, I'll put this up there. I'm not saying don't get treated. I'm not saying don't go to doctors. I'll never say that. There are miracles worked by medicine all the time for all of us. I'm still alive because of antibiotics, right? Would have died when I was young, if not for, there were some amazing things. But with cancer specifically, what I saw then and then kept seeing was the treatment's worse than the disease. And there's all this, early detection and, the cures happen from this and from the treatment. If you get through it, then you get this. But then as I started studying this, I was like, well, the 5-year efficacy of these treatments for many cancers, it's just, you might get through it, but 5 years later, it just comes back worse and get you, and they don't count that. And then also, of course, there's the unknowable. You don't count all the people who, have cancer in them all the time and their body handles it. Those people aren't recorded. So it just, and I know there are very good counter arguments to anything I can say here. It's like smart people have lots of smart things to say, but for me, it knocked me back. And then I got knocked back super hard as I was making this decision, medical school or not medical school, when my brother died. That was just a disaster. I was old enough to evaluate better what was going on even then. And yeah, just disheartening.
Also of cancer. Your brother, was that also of cancer? Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah, it was. He had a something called a rhabdomyosarcoma, was being treated at Best Hospital in Boston, wasn't working, went off to Mexico for treatments that are not allowed in the US, cured, absolute, miraculous, wonderful. And the beauty of that, my dad went with him and stayed with him through that. So their relationship got better through that connection, much better than it had ever been. And the beauty of the treatment was that it felt good. My brother felt better every day that he was there, every day that he was doing the protocols that they were following. Not worse. He wasn't poisoning himself. He was supporting his body. And I know this rings a lot of bells for you because it's what you talk about all the time is sensing what your body needs, supporting it, enabling it, not somehow counteracting it, suffering through and thinking that that's going to make things better. And then when he came back from that treatment, he went back to his hospital. They said, this is a miracle. We don't understand it, but let's hit it with a really powerful treatment just to make sure it stays away. And that killed him. So I was pretty much done at that point. And in many senses, still done. I don't know that I've recovered from that.
Yeah, I'm sorry for your loss. And it strikes me there's a sort of questioning of two things there. Like, one is the conventional way of doing things really that smart? Like, hey, this killed someone, and as far as I can tell, right? So there's a questioning of a kind of a mainstream view more generally, I would imagine, than just around cancer treatment, for example. And the second thing I'm hearing is I lost a cousin who I was raised with pretty much as a brother when I was a teenager. And the thing it did for me was go, oh, impermanence, I'd probably call it now, or hey, is life worth living, or what am I doing with my life? There was, hit me in a few ways, like an existential underlining that life is not a given. I mean, there's two things I kind of picked up there. Are either of those anywhere near accurate?
Both, totally. The existential one, I had very, very lovingly and well-intentionedly had a shaped life, especially by my mom, through that homeschooling, through every step of along the way, making choices that would lead to the right school, the right college, the right career. And while I had a lot of freedoms going through homeschool and just being stubborn and stubborn, it also cut off a lot of paths that to this day I would have liked to try and fail just to know, so get over it. Yeah, I need to.
But what would you have been in an alternative life then? I've always fancied myself as a terrorist, but I was always a bit too nice. There's a few other careers I've sort of had fantasies around, just for shits and giggles. Like what had you not been hippie homeschooled, what could you be now?
I think if I had not had the shaped life of do things as much as possible to get into the school, to get the career, I think what didn't fall in that playbook was as much as I scored well on tests and could work hard and have great attention span, all the stuff that if you want to, if you know the path and you want to get into, I know this is funny in places other than the Northeast of America. We still talk about where we went to university when we're 90. But bear with me a bit. As hard as it is to imagine, probably from where you're sitting, it's like it's this strange American, especially Northeast American thing, obsession. But had that not been the path, as much as up here works okay, some people would disagree, but I just love being outdoors. I love running. I love kicking a ball. I loved football. I loved, American football. I loved European football. I love soccer. I love doing physical things. And what happened for me is that dove underground for a long time through, the Marshall experience that you referenced. So it wasn't in the sort of mainstream public, just join a soccer team or a football team. And then the other thing that happened is ultimately all of that desire got sort of sidelined for, well, there's this academic path that needs to be followed. And I think I'm not saying that I would have been a world champion football player, but it's a funny thing. I really would have liked to fail trying. Go ahead.
Well, the reason I brought the existential bit as well is you didn't just do sort of football or something. You were doing some fairly extreme, hardcore sports. I mean, in another interview, I was quite amused by someone sort of saying your wife had kind of banned you from doing. I've been banned from working in war zones anymore, actually, Michael, as well, by my wife. So that path of going into sort of quite extreme things as well, right? Before the yoga.
Yeah. So I think that's maybe a natural reaction to when you don't get to do what you want in a healthy way. And for you, different thing, going into war zones, while that might be a personal risk, it's a necessary one. I don't know if I did the same. I was down at the World Trade Center for the first week after it fell down because I had two things. One is some basic medical training, and then the second was rope skills. So I knew how to set up pulley systems to lower into the elevator shafts, and that wasn't normal training back then. And I knew that from high altitude mountaineering of all things. So that was the other way out there, but could be on the side of a regular career thing that I pushed out into. And I think that was maybe the biggest thing when Tara figured out, you do that? Yeah.
What?
That's not gonna happen.
Hear those questions. Yeah. Tell me the details again. What martial arts did you study?
It's similar to you. It's because my training was mostly from U.S. military background. It was everything that works. So I was learning Tai Chi without learning Tai Chi, essentially being not an enormous guy, especially in a military context, knowing how to turn lines into circles, not meet force with opposing force. That was something I learned in making sort of martial connections with other people very early on. And then Gung Fu and Qigong and some Jiu-Jitsu and Taijutsu. There are lots of things, a lot of just practical application to get it done without a lot of academic knowing what texts and who said what, and even the cultural richness and philosophy, the bigger picture of everything I was learning, that was all missing and not something I really understood or started coming into until a lot later. I was young and quick and
I'm trying to get the transformation. So
hard.
from on this academic path to say you don't want to do that, extreme sports, sounds like some shady military type connections as well, you know, from their family background. Won't go too into it. And, you know, martial arts. How did you become a peace-loving hippie yogi from all this? Like what was the next move there?
Oh, man. I don't know if I'm a peace-loving hippie yogi.
I did want to poke you a little bit with that, but you're certainly part of the yoga scene. I mean, your yoga school is pretty big. I mean, you guys is one of the better known schools in American yoga, right?
Well, I don't know if too many people put me as in that. I'm kind of on a side. I'm maybe a person of interest in that, but
I'm also on that list.
But you know, there's this fellow I've been following a long time, Krishna Das, and he always says the best practice is the one that you do. And so as long as it's not one that's causing you harm, you know, that's likely to say, oh, as you often say, it's like about noticing it. Notice, where am I causing myself harm? Be in a practice to actually see that. Maybe make it a little better, maybe make a better choice tonight. And you know, I came into yoga and it was that for a while. And then when yoga started bumping up, how I was learning it was bumping up against things that made more sense to me, whether from Western medicine or science or from Qigong or Tai Chi. When yoga sort of conflicted with that, then that sort of touched off well, what's going on here? And I think that's something that you know a bit about. Well, what's going on here?
What the fuck is the point in this?
Yeah.
So actually, just because what got you into yoga, because given your movement background, I imagine you looked at a lot of modern posture yoga and thought
it was a girl.
You know, it's usually that. I was gonna say, is it?
Come on, Mark.
Was it? What was her name?
Nicole.
Okay, thank you, Nicole, for bringing Michael our way. Much appreciated. So there was a girl who did yoga, and you just sort of wanted to follow her in her leggings or whatever.
She seemed to know a few things that I didn't know.
Okay.
And I tried it, and you know, it's funny. I think a lot of us come into yoga when, I don't want to speak for everyone, but come into yoga when everything isn't great, need to feel a little better, need something to do, need to form a better connection with me, take better care of myself, be good to myself, radical things. And so it's a time of need and a time of vulnerability also. And you know, for me, I think I was open to that at that point. None of my college roommates has ever understood yoga. You know, why, like, people who do that, obviously it's a cult. They say ridiculous things that are just on the surface verifiably false. None of the medical claims
clearly not the case.
absolutely not true. Sweat is not a mechanism of detox unless all of your detox organs have failed, in which case you got problems.
You're not going to
be sweating it out
things
in a
out of your
yoga class.
spine, but
twisting is not also detox because our organs don't bend to mechanical manipulation that way. Good thing that they don't. Just any number of claims. So my college roommates, who maybe weren't as messed up as me, were very able to look at these practices and say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Don't do it if you don't need to. Well, maybe I needed to. And I have to say, the first times I was doing it, the first years even, it was, you sit down, sit cross-legged for a while, do some things with other people. It felt awesome.
I'm guessing I'm going to touch on the vulnerability point here, if I may again. Like, my sense is that, these extreme stuff, throwing yourself up and down mountains, beating people up, getting beaten people, all that stuff. It seemed like I know you're cool in New York and all that, but it seemed to me there's a part of you that went, you know what, I actually want to take care of myself. And this seems like a sort of kind of gentler place. Is that fair to say, or is that?
I didn't want to die early.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, Mark, but yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, I didn't want to die early.
To yoga with those two words, part of me was like, I want to be kind to myself, right? Like, I don't want to end up a suicide or an alcoholic that I was before, or like my cousin or whatever. Like, I knew I had to do something to be a bit kinder to myself. And then I was just met with like the yoga culture of just like, what the fuck is this? What are you saying? Why are you speaking in that voice? And it was like two sides of me. Part of me that was like, you really need this. And there wasn't many options. It was hippy dippy or nothing. And another part of me that was just pulling my hair out every class I was in. And then I started to go, okay, can this be done a bit better? And I bumped into some serious resistance with that. Like, people weren't happy just by questioning, like, what are we doing here? Is this really smart? Mechanically, does that really make sense? Like, hey, I've got this other principle of movement from elsewhere that seems like it's more kind on the body. Did you have kind of a parallel process, kind of like bumping into that stuff?
This is why it shouldn't have taken 7 years for us to hook up, because I think we could have helped each other a little bit, if only to say, I get it.
You're not the only one.
And I don't know if you know Derek Beres, another guy out there who gets it.
Okay, okay, I'll look him up. I've heard his name. Yeah.
Hook you up another time. But there are people who get it. But man, yeah, I think we had exactly the same experiences. And at the same time, at the very heart of it, something Tara always says, it's like, she was very innocent about it. She couldn't understand why isn't everyone doing this? It has so much potential. It can be so good. But, I think, Mark, well, I'll tell you this story. There is a friend of ours for a long time who was very senior in the Ashtanga community in New York. And he told us at one point two things. One is that he hoped that his daughter never got into this, because it's a path of torture for him.
Wow.
And a tortured path. Yet a necessary one for him as he sees it. And then the other thing he said is, all these alignment cues, move this part here, that part there, this part there, fuss, fidget, fix everything. Of course, from your martial background, that you can't manipulate individual parts into alignment, that doesn't lead to alignment. It leads to a picture, but not to an aligned body. No East Asian martial or healing art does things part by part. Mm-hmm. We're much more holistic than that. And by the way, those arts, Qigong practices, are largely intact for 5,000 years. Yoga, people like to say it's 5,000 years old. The yoga we're all doing in class is less than 100 years old.
Yeah.
No movement lineage, no pose lineage, nothing to stand on, really. Lots of other good things, but the yoga class itself. But this fellow said all of those part by part, fuss, fidget, fix, all those individual alignment cues that then were taken out of Ashtanga and applied into alignment-based yoga, all totally made up. They're just to support the truth of suffering, that yoga is meant to be a practice of suffering, So we come into it, we do something awkward to ourselves, we endure it, and get this sense that this too shall pass.
Wow, there's a certain logic to that. If your goal is, life is suffering and we need to transcend that somehow, and you need a practice of suffering more to get used to it, and maybe with some sense of sort of purification, inverted commas, there's a whole worldview behind suffering is good, right?
Yes.
And then there's another part of that that's pure madness if we're looking at it from the point of view of actually having a sustainable body, a pleasurable body, a body that can move.
Yes. Yeah, we're good enough at making things hard on ourselves, and we're not good at being good to ourselves.
Yeah.
We don't need to practice more being hard on ourselves, making simple things hard. We don't need to practice that. We know that one.
Yeah. I mean, I sort of say life proposes enough challenges itself. I mean, I am a believer in deliberately doing challenging things in order to sort of confront that, choicefully, be in a calibrated way, and build that. An easy life doesn't lead to strength; it leads to weakness in many ways. Like I like my cold showers, I like my breath holds, stuff but that's calibrated challenge. I don't feel like I'm damaging my body when I have a cold shower. I don't feel like I'm going against the grain. I'm just doing something which I know is going to be a challenge at 6 a.m. and actually sets up my whole day afterwards, So it's I'm not against doing difficult things. There's logic in that, I think.
Yeah, makes sense.
So you started bringing some of these movement principles into yoga. So anyone listening to the podcast, look up Michael Taylor Yoga on YouTube. Beautiful movement, just very fluid, moving like a human. What was some of those principles?
Humans are beautiful.
Humans are. You don't need to do anything weird in a way, right? So what are some of those principles you brought in? Like if someone said, well, what are you talking about exactly? Like what kind of things would you describe?
Well, Mark, I don't know if I'm going to get into trouble with you here as a martial arts pro and gatekeeper of the ancient secrets. But
not anymore. Go on.
But if you study Tai Chi or Kung Fu, you'll know that there are basic foundations for how you do what you do. And there's hard style martial arts and soft martial arts. So hard style is, soft is turn lines into circles. So I basically took the turn lines into circles sustainability set of foundations and said, let's define those. Let's put them in writing. When very much like, it's not that martial arts or East Asian arts are free of the nonsense totally. Sure, it's just that in some ways now they're not as popular as yoga, so there isn't as much nonsense. But these things, similar to what was being told to both of us in yoga, that these are only to be directly transmitted by a guru after we get the Shakti pot in the head, which, as Tara says, is just actually pushing someone down so you can control them.
So just for listeners, I should say Tara Stiles is Michael's wife and co-founder of Strala Yoga, one of the sort of better known American yogis, for those who don't know the yoga scene. So if that's not, a lot of my listeners won't know who that is.
Yeah,
what you mean.
Totally.
So the pat on the head, pushing people down. Okay.
Oh man, there was a great New York Times expose that was done on that with a California famous teacher who was, well, we'll save that for another story. But, what was the story that I was supposed to launch on now?
What movement principles did you bring into yoga to make it better? I think I might call this Yoga is Wrong, this podcast. Or unfucking yoga, something like that.
Oh man.
So like what were some of those principles you brought in?
So similarly in East Asian arts, you're not supposed to write these things down. Some of them, if you read the sort of the Tai Chi chronicles, some of these things are written to be too powerful to give to anyone who hasn't dedicated at least 10 years to living with a master. So you're really not supposed to write about them or put them on YouTube, which was exactly what Tara ran into, and I think you ran into when she first started sharing what she was sharing on YouTube in 2007. It's like, you have no right to put these ancient secrets on YouTube. Like, well, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
But it's basically it's a system of cult control that was
Mhm.
many people, even good people, well-intentioned people, without really knowing that that's what we were doing. We were caught in that sort of control. But these principles, things like, very simple, before you move, make sure you're movable.
Okay.
and Mark, and I'm sure you've rebelled similarly in yoga. Before you move, make sure you're rigid and immovable and very tense.
Yeah, I
And
mean, just
then when you move, it's going to frustrate the crap out of you, and you're going to need a lot more training.
just look at your videos. It's like, oh, he's relaxed. It was like there's someone doing yoga in a relaxed way, and like a fluid. The whole body's moving. There's it's not linear. There's no straight lines in the body. So why would you try and set them up like Iyengar on a picture and draw lines on it? And it just looks fluid. And I mean, you've got a cat behind you there. My wife did a Sistema with me last night for the first time in an online workshop, which is sort of fluid martial art. And she said, "Oh, I like it. It's cat-like. She liked that sense that you didn't resist force, because she's kind of lazy, my wife, and she doesn't like exercise, but she liked the fact that it was minimal exercise. This is your basic judo principle, like maximum efficiency, minimum effort. And that's what your yoga, and I almost want to say inverted commas, looks like to me. Like you're not doing unnecessary work, which surely should be pretty basic.
Surely. Yeah. So, and that's, that principle, everything you've just been describing in Tai Chi, we don't have a great word for it in English in some ways. It's called softness. In English, people think, oh, soft. Well, that's bad. That means you're soft. You're not working hard enough. You're not strong enough to deal with the toughness of life. Well, in Tai Chi, and whether you're studying Tai Chi or calligraphy or shiatsu, it's a precursor to being able to do anything. Because if you're rigid and tense, you might look like a warrior, but you're the kind of warrior that's at war with yourself. That doesn't work so well.
Driving with the brakes on, right? But, and creativity is another aspect that I really liked about your videos from day one. Like you don't just have a set move. This is a sun salutation, or I think you've got one video where you take a sun salutation and just kind of jam on it. But it's there's a creativity which I remember once I was with another Tara Stiles, a friend of mine who was teaching a workshop in London, and she got the yogis to do like a little bit of dance and free movement, and they all just freaked the fuck out and didn't know what to do. So there's all these beautiful, skinny, athletic-looking women, none of whom can move. And she was dancing, and like I was dancing away. She's like, "Oh, you're an embodiment person. You're a somatic person." I think she said, "Like, what's your name?" Oh my God, I've heard of you. But it was just obvious that most of the yogis couldn't dance because they didn't have the creative flow of the body. They just had moves.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring that up, because now I'm remembering the first way that we laid this all out is we said there's 11 principles. There are 11 principles of natural movement, and just distilling this down from Qigong. And of course, there are 5 billion of them. But if you want to start learning, maybe let's talk about 11. And the last one was play, joy, and because you can see people doing things very technically well, but it's almost like there's a hitting the brakes the whole time. There's not enough chi, right? There's not enough energy. There's not enough play, not enough joy. And without that, it's exactly what you said. You're missing the creativity. You're missing the fun. There's almost no point in any of the rest of it. It reminds me of something Krishnadas said. He remembers when Sharon Salzberg and the rest went off and studied Buddhism, and then came back, and he sort of more stayed closer to what he was learning in Hinduism and from his guru, which was all about love. And something many decades later, when Sharon and some of the Buddhists came back, and they all came back together in upstate New York to talk about what happened here, I remember she said, I wish we had gotten what you got, because we took a really academic path, endless study, endless discipline, and it was the path of discipline and control, which could lead to peace. But his path, the way she saw it, led to love and joy. And, not that it makes us not effed up, but it's a practice. And when we're in it, it feels amazing. So I think, creativity, like you said, there's a lot there.
It just looks more enjoyable when I see your videos. I'm like, I can almost feel my body reacting to it, guys. Just looking at that feels more enjoyable than forcing myself into weird pretzel shapes, It's all right. So the yoga scene, I think it maybe is getting more playful. I'm seeing like acro yoga and stuff like that. But there's also been this kind of, the big Western, New York, London style yoga. You're in New York, right? Yeah.
Until recently.
Oh, you've moved. Okay. So where are you now, out of interest?
We moved to be near my wife Tara's whole farm family in Southern Illinois.
Oh, wow. That's way away.
All that's going on now. Yeah, it's just how often do you have a chance for your 4-year-old to drive a combine? So we decided to take that chance now. We'll be back east before long, but we're enjoying time with family out here now.
Okay, wow, that's quite a change. This is from the urban yoga scene. I was quite shocked when I've done yoga in London, and it was just like, wow, this is a really hardcore scene. I'm imagining New York even more hardcore. All right, let's talk about Tara a little bit then. So I didn't know you two were connected. So I would come across your videos. You have different surnames, and
Hers sounds cooler.
Stiles. Michael Taylor is quite an average name, isn't it? If I was that'd be a good spy name, but it blends in.
It is.
to Google you. Yeah. And she's sort of well known as a yogi, and I'd come across both of you independently. And I'm probably gonna have to apologize to her when I do meet her, because I just sort of wrote her off as like shiny, skinny, good dentist, one of those American yoga teachers whose husband probably does marketing and they used to be a dancer or something. And I
hate those.
You know what I'm talking about? So and then I found out she's married to you, and I thought, oh, maybe I've judged without really looking here. Like, I mean, is your kind of movement work a big part of the school you founded, or are you a sort of weird side dish that gets sort of served up as a wild card?
So often I find out more about what Tara really thinks of me when I read what she writes. But at least it's the good side. And she wrote recently in a newsletter, because we have a year-long online Tai Chi training and practice coming up. And Tara's going to do some of that. I'm going to do a lot of that. We wanted a way to share a lot for a whole year. So she wrote about that. And she's like, well, my background is in dance. And so she studied classical ballet and then many other forms of dance. She went to school for that. And she said, well, of course, she learned that moving well, you don't fight with yourself. You don't introduce rigidity and awkwardness into what you're doing. And, the result of that is it can feel good what you're doing, even on a professional level. And you can have, as you said, Mark, creativity. You have this connection to your body and everything that's here for you, which is amazing. And so she had come across yoga in this dance school. Her primary teacher was an American ballet theater principal from New York, who was also a yogi, and gave her the autobiography of a yogi book. And she dove in and she's like, this is amazing. And she had that question, why doesn't everybody do this? So she just started sharing it with friends and family, and running into, oh, you have a problem with your back because you're sitting on a tractor all day. Let's try these things to help. And just hearing the stories that she'd hear from people about, well, why they thought yoga was weird, or they bumped. It wasn't that people hadn't heard of yoga. They had heard of it, and they had concluded for themselves that it wasn't for them.
It's not for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And so she ran into that. And so she was like, well, something horrible must have been done to a whole lot of people to make them think that. So let's see if we can offer it in another way. And so she did. And then as we got together, I think when I met her, wasn't doing yoga the way you're doing yoga and the way I'm doing yoga now. I was back in my teacher pleasing mode. If I was going in, I wanted to be the best in class and do what the teacher was asking, even more than they thought they were asking.
Did
Yeah,
you go into
ahead.
her class? Was she your teacher?
No, she was not my, no, when
I was hoping I could.
wouldn't that be
There's
cool?
some teacher abuse narrative. I could have reversed. Oh, damn it. Okay.
Mark, maybe we can rewrite it for our movie.
Okay, so you were there doing downwards dog, and she kind
I
of.
was doing yoga in New York and LA before I met Tara. And
So she was in the Midwest.
No, she was in New York. She's from the Midwest, but she was in, similar to me. She got stuck in New York for 20 years. When we came together, she saw, well, you're doing this, but she started learning a little bit about my background. And in a way, it was highlighting for me this strange, it was like a strange schizophrenia in me, where I was doing something that I enjoyed doing with the yoga community, but at the same time was very much running up against things that made sense to me academically, things that made sense to me physically, movement-wise, sensing-wise, philosophy. In a lot of ways, didn't make sense based on stuff I had learned before in school and in practice. And so Tara healed that. Basically, for whatever reason, until her, it didn't occur to me to create a yoga for me that made sense to all of me. And so that's how that happened.
How is it having a slightly famous wife?
Oh boy.
My wife prefers to be anonymous. She doesn't like it, for example, if there's a picture of her in a newsletter or anything like that. She's sort of the opposite end of things. She prefer. Someone came up to her in the shop once and said, "Oh, are you Daria, Mark Walsh's wife?" And she just went, "Who the fuck are you?" She was not impressed with that. So it's very different on my side of things here. But is it a weird thing? Like one of my friends, Tess, she says, I never sleep with anyone who's shorter or poorer than I am. She's got a sense. We always sometimes have this sense in society that the man should be the richer one, the taller one, the more famous one, whatever it is. Does it bother you? Is it strange? Is it nice? Like, I'd love to get some insight into that.
You're hitting me with new ones I hadn't thought. So first of all, I think the most striking thing is just having a wife.
Right. That's a huge thing anyway, right? Let's start there.
So, we're going from way down here to
striking because you didn't expect to, or because what?
Yeah, kind of like kids didn't expect.
How did this happen?
Yeah, exactly. And how did it happen to me? So yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, and navigating through everything that that involves, and then I should say everything amazing that involves.
Yeah, in case she hears this, Tara, if you're out there, very much, and definitely.
And then from there, for Tara, I think you're right. I've heard the same things about what women want. But for Tara, I think she wanted to make sure that she just got to do things her way. That she was a creative person. She wanted something to share, something to help people, and didn't want to have that subsumed or second to other life requirements, whether from a person or otherwise. So I don't think she was looking for someone to either work with or take work away from her. She had things she wanted to do, and she was going to do them. And then as far as for my experience, yeah, I think the biggest thing is just having a wife. It's, to me, she's not a famous person. I think of famous people as Angelina Jolie.
Yeah. I mean, I find it ridiculous when someone says, "Oh, Mark, you're kind of famous in your world." And I'm like, yeah, in my very small world.
Yeah, it's like, and for those people, you hear about I mean, if someone comes up on to you on the street every once in a while, that's a very different thing than having piles of cars following you everywhere
Right.
you go. And it's just that life, I maybe have a tiny lens into it from talking to other people. It's not the life that we have, and but I understand how tough that is. No, for me, it's just having a wife,
So you don't
which is
mind the
cool.
hundreds of marriage proposals she must get from, rich men in Dubai from Instagram on a daily basis or anything like that.
She keeps that all a secret from me.
Keeps that all a secret. Probably doesn't do it on Instagram. Okay, well that's interesting to know. So I thought I'd ask about that as I was curious, and I found myself almost sort of embarrassed to be like, oh, I hope he doesn't think, like, because I was genuinely interested in your work first. So yeah, so I came across
It's a rarity. And
it.
so are you, Mark.
A little bit, a little bit. We're unusual characters, both of us. You started doing a bit of trauma stuff as well lately. Did I see that?
Us both. So there's this joke always about psychologists. So they're the craziest ones, and that's why they're interested in it. And I think it took getting into this trauma path more and getting into the more current research and what doctors are doing there for me to realize just how crazy I really am. But it's been fantastic, and it kind of just came out of nowhere. Someone who was organizing conferences for some doctors, including Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps Score, and a few other guys, Dr. Levine and Dr. Porges. She came to us and said, hey, can you join this? Can you join this conference? And it touched off a lot of research and then a lot of desire to share on our part, because as you've discovered too, there's something in everything these doctors were sharing that said, we need to create a safe space to feel, to notice what we feel, and respond to that, and even come into that feeling and transform it into something better. And there were two things that kind of struck me listening to these guys. One is there was a characterization of yoga, which he was saying yoga is one of the practices that can help, along with virtually every ancient culture has something written in there that they've used. Now, of course, the ancient practice of yoga used for healing trauma is not the practice that we're seeing now in class, as you've noted. But what this fellow said, Dr. van der Kolk said with yoga is, well, I can see how I went to a yoga class and they put me in a really awkward, uncomfortable position. I really didn't like being there. And then they counted to 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then it was over. That was good. And then they put me in another one and, really awkward, really didn't feel good, and counted to 5. And he said, one of the things with trauma is you lose your clock. You lose this sort of internal clock that says this too shall pass. Yeah, sucky things occur all the time, but they're not permanent. And so he was hypothesizing that maybe the reason yoga could help is put yourself in awkward and uncomfortable and then count it out and know that it'll be over again and again. But then, continues other talks and later, he really likes Qigong. And so this sort of touched off a lot for me. I'm like, okay, well, what another one of the doctors said is you have to come into challenge and reorient to it. Come into challenge again and reorient in a way that transforms it, that says it's okay to be here and it can even feel good to be here. It's not damaging to be here. You don't need to enter a fight, flight, or retreat and withdrawal one of either of those neurological loops. This is the polyvagal theory guy. So you are where you are, you come into challenge and you reorient, and that's Qigong. It's not put yourself in a crappy situation again and again and just wait for it to be over. It's whatever situation, however crappy it is, you can change your position where you are now. You can use your breath, your body position, how you move, how you orient to where you are in your environment, first inside, to transform it, to make it better. And that's Qigong. And I was like, well, okay, we have something to share here.
So you've been sharing around Qigong and trauma.
So yeah, and with the foundations of Qigong, which I think is, again, it is, you've hit also, it doesn't mean you have to do Qigong. You can do yoga this way. You can do Tai Chi this way. You can do swimming this way. You can do embodied meditation this way. You know, it's just saying that there's a foundation for how we do what we do, which, well, one of the doctors put it this way. He said, you don't want your treatment to mimic the symptoms and responses of real stress and strain and struggle. So what he would see when he looks at holding yourself very rigid in a yoga pose and accumulating stress and strain as you individually manipulate one part at a time into looking like another person, or what you should do, what I must accomplish.
Yeah, I mean,
any of that.
Become a stick to hit yourself with, and another way to be bad, and another way to find abusive kind of, overlord relationships. And I've just now come up with a new phrase. Tell me if you like it. Just invented it. You've heard of spiritual bypassing. I suspect a lot of yoga is physical bypassing. It's people don't want to feel their emotions, and so they feel your physical body to such intensity in these uncomfortable ass, hot classes, that it gives you a break from your emotions, if nothing else, right? But I think it might be a little bit addictive in that way for a lot of traumatized people. It is not a simple relationship, is there? Are you practicing tension? Are you practicing trauma? Are you opening your window of tolerance and learning better self-regulation? Are you being co-regulated because you're in a nice room full of people all doing exactly the same thing, which is completely different from real life, where everything's much more chaotic? But it's not a simple relationship, is it? And I think it's naive of yoga teachers to say, or anyone to say, yoga's good for trauma.
Oh boy. Yeah. There are things that are good for trauma, and you can put them in a lot of different practices, including yoga. But you're right. It doesn't mean that if I just go into yoga and mimic the signs and symptoms and results of trauma, rigidity, tension, needing to defend against discomfort, all the things that trigger my body to say it's a problem where I am, and I need to either get out of it or shut down. You don't want to mimic the very real and biologically useful responses that your body has to real currently present problems. You don't want to mimic that in your practices. And if that's what the yoga is, then yeah, yoga is not going to help. And you mentioned co-regulation, really important. This is something that some of the research that these guys were sharing. There are stages of healing, and the first stages don't necessarily involve getting together to make safe co-regulating connections with other people. We might not be ready for that. There are first stages that involve how you breathe by yourself, that involve how you move with yourself, how you sense what's going on in you and reorient within your own system first. Because what they found is the part of your brain that's impacted by trauma is not the part where we're thinking about all of this and talking about all this. In fact, thinking and talking, we might totally agree with each other, totally see how messed up I am, but it's not going to heal the part of me that needs healing first for me to get back to that kind of social connection and regulation, whereas breathing and moving does.
We need to wrap this up fairly soon.
Okay.
A trauma group coming up. Is there anything, we got a little time, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you wish you'd been asked about, or something you think, I wish when I was getting interviewed they'd ask me that, because that's the interesting bit, and instead they asked me the same old stuff?
You're not guilty of that, Mark.
And not yet, but I love to keep it fresh and new, like if I hear one of my interviews back and it sounds like it was someone else's interview, I'm not happy. So it's my ADHD at work, I think, for my own amusement. But is there anything you thought, what, that's really interesting to me just right now? I'd love to talk about that a bit before we close.
I think it's what you brought up at the end. It's this healing, and you know, understanding that there isn't one practice that can help. I mean, I think you said a while back that you picked yoga not because there's anything isolatedly better about yoga, but that it's very popular, and so it seems like a good lens through which to look at what can be good and what can be not so helpful. And I think what's been eye-opening to me with healing is now there's this enormous body of research that says how we do what we do is what creates the effects. It's not it's not just doing yoga that's going to heal me or make things better.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So as people ask me what is embodiment, I say it's the how. It's how we do that. Whatever that is, that's more important necessarily. People say, is Tai Chi good for this? Is yoga good for this? I say, well, how are you doing it? You know, who, with, where, but the how's probably the most vital. And it sounds like you've gone on quite a healing journey there, really, from, you know, we started off talking about your granddad and your brother and sort of losing some faith maybe in the mainstream there a little bit, going into these quite hardcore things, finding yoga almost against your best instincts, blaming this poor girl for it. Clearly there was a deep urge, but we can pretend it was her. And coming to sort of healing other people's trauma, I mean, that's quite a circle, it strikes me.
Yeah, and I think until coming, I won't say I've completed that circle, but by a long shot, but coming around to this part of the story, I didn't really realize that there was a time in my life where I was very short relationship, go off and climb a mountain, very short relationship, go off and climb another mountain. And even up till very recently, everything I was seeking was get out of New York, find a spot in nature where I could be by myself. And I'd find a spot that was beautiful and it wasn't remote enough. And I was looking and looking for more remote, more away to just be with more and more untouched nature. And it wasn't until going through these last few weeks and few months that I realized, oh, wow, I'm a little messed up. You know,
running away from life and going into
and that's actually a mark. I would never have said, I would say there are people who have trauma. I would never have said that I'm there, that I'm in that. And then realizing it's not that I didn't want people, but everything I was doing was disconnect. And it finally occurred to me what's just blatantly obvious, I hope, to most people, which is, yeah, I love my time in nature, but what I'm missing, what keeps me unhappy in each of these places, no matter how remote, isn't their degree of remoteness. It's my friends aren't there. And I said this recently to my high school roommate, and he's like, "Oh, good. I'm glad you're finally acknowledging that."
You've got attachment issues. But there's a really beautiful picture on stralayoga.com. That's STRALA yoga.com, where all of yours and Tara's classes are. It looks like online class, but it's a beautiful picture on the front page. Not your wife looking fabulous, but you and a small child, which I assume is your child, that you haven't just picked up this kid from the street. And you're with bockends, which are sort of wooden swords. And you clearly look like you're deeply in connection and deeply following her. It looks like she's leading her here, actually. It looks like you're learning from her in this picture. I'm like, here's this guy who's climbed mountains and done all this crazy shit. And he ends up, it looks to me, and the kid could be all my story, this, kind of finding his deepest thing and just connecting with his kid, like the most ordinary thing.
There's a lot coming with her. And you're right. Just picking up a stick there, or out in the woods, or climbing a hill, everything is completely new, because this is something else that I'm slow to learn, meeting people where they are. And really great to have a 4-year-old for that.
It's beautiful. It just strikes me, especially holding a weapon, you know, the martial arts weapon, the surgeon's knife. And it's just sort of turning that into play and having that little teacher. It just looks, maybe I'm on my second day of fasting and I might be a bit high. So I hope I'm not reading too much into everything I see today. Michael, this was an absolute pleasure. Anything you want to plug before we finish? Anything people should check out other than stralayoga.com?
No, hopefully people keep coming to you. I want to keep hearing good things from people who have found their way to you.
Oh, you'll hear bad things too, Michael. Don't just wait till those rumors hit you.
The bad things that I've been able to pick up, Mark, are about your blatant honesty.
Just a bit blunt for this world of bullshit.
Yeah, and if people want more, we also have the stralahome.com site. We actually share classes every day now. It's one of the, if you can even say good thing together with pandemic, you know, but finding a way to still share directly with people every day. So yeah, we get to be here, we get to practice every day, still in groups, which is pretty awesome. So we're around.
Yeah, you got a full schedule, all kinds of stuff. Beautiful, Michael. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Mark. Keep doing what you do.